LDS memoirist Joanna Brooks writes, "The year we all turned 12, the boys in my Sunday school class received the priesthood, the spiritual authority to lead, bless, and baptize, passed from Mormon father to Mormon son by the laying on of hands. That's what Chucky, Mike, and Brian got for their 12th birthdays. I got the Marie Osmond Guide to Beauty, Health, and Style." As this passage from the Book of Mormon Girls suggests, priesthood in Mormonism is the power of God given to all men and boys aged 12 and older to perform church ordinances, lead Mormon congregations, offer blessings of healing and comfort, and preside over Mormon homes. While women speak, teach, and pray in church meetings, they are not ordained to the lay priesthood available to all men. This means all men in the LDS Church have a spiritual and practical authority that women do not. Because institutional power in the church is tied to priesthood office, women are excluded from nearly every position of clerical, fiscal, ritual, and ultimate decision-making authority. As many Mormon women have observed, their 12-year-old sons have more substantive ritual authority than they do. Even women's significant work within church auxiliaries, such as the Female Relief Society and Young Women's Organizations, is subject to the direction of male priesthood leaders, particularly after the priesthood correlation program was instituted in the last half of the 20th century. This pattern persists in Mormon homes. Despite encouraging full partnership between husbands and wives, which we applaud, the Church's proclamation on the family insists that men still preside. Gendered language that is inequitable, though modified somewhat over the years, also remains part of Mormon temple worship and projects a pattern of patriarchal authority into the eternities. Nowhere is this patriarchal pattern more starkly articulated than in Bruce Hafen's keynote address at the 1985 Brigham Young University Women's Conference entitled "Women, Feminism, and the Blessings of the Priesthood." Hafen, a former dean of the BYU Law School and member of the church's hierarchy, lists several blessings that are available to both men and women in the church. As if it were a mere trifle, he adds, listen carefully, "The one category of blessing in which the role of women is not the same as that of men holding the priesthood is that of administering the gospel and governing all things." In response to concerns about the inequity inherent in such a position, leaders in the church have struggled to draw parallels of equivalency at various times between priesthood on the one hand and womanhood, sisterhood, or motherhood on the other, with motherhood being the most employed pairing. In fact, the idea of separate but equal spheres for men and women that undergirds the belief that men have priesthood and women have motherhood was cited yet again last year by a high-positioned Mormon leader as a possible reason for the denial of priesthood ordination to women. However, many Mormon feminists have pointed out that separate but equal is not equal, particularly as it pertains to institutions of governance, both secular and religious. It is true, equality is not about sameness. It's about removing obstacles to access and opportunity. The tortured logic that pairs motherhood with priesthood and the countless assurances from male LDS church leaders that women are just as important as men sound patronizing rather than laudatory and signal an uneasy recognition that something might be amiss. Not unique to Mormons, rhetoric that exalts motherhood has been used throughout history to circumscribe women's lives and deny them access to the voting booth, political office, education, employment, and spiritual empowerment. Let's be clear. In saying this, Mormon feminists are not denigrating motherhood. I'm a mother. They are questioning its pairing with priesthood and its use to justify limitations on women's authority in LDS homes and church governance. Further, they point out the obvious. Fatherhood is the appropriate parallel to motherhood. Any other pairing, they argue, detracts from the important role fathers play in their children's lives and masks women's lack of spiritual and institutional authority in Mormonism. In addition, while LDS feminists applaud recent efforts to assert full partnership as the appropriate pattern for Mormon marriages, they rightly argue that the Church's insistence that men still preside over their wives undercuts its assertions of partnership. What's a Mormon feminist to do? Lest the prospect for women's ordination seem bleak, LDS feminists are scouring and finding glimmers of women's empowerment in church history, theology, and ritual. While most Mormon feminists acknowledge that women have never held priesthood offices in the church, LDS women in the 19th and early 20th centuries performed institutionally sanctioned blessings of healing and comfort, practices now seen as requiring priesthood office. Two, they assert, the wording in certain of Mormonism's founding documents, such as the newly released minutes of the 1840s Female Relief Society of Nauvoo, seems to promise priesthood power for women, as does the church's temple ritual. In fact, some LDS women claim priesthood authority by virtue of temple endowment and initiatory ceremonies, although most would acknowledge their claim and ability to exercise that authority remain unrecognized by the institutional church. Perhaps the most theologically promising avenue for women's empowerment is the presence of a Heavenly Mother in traditional Mormonism. Although trapped in a patriarchal paradigm, the church has been slow to acknowledge women's attempts to move God the Mother out of the shadows of our theological discourse. Despite feminist efforts, for many Mormons, God the Mother remains God the Father's supportive wife perfected, silently plumping pillows and awaiting our return. Sorry. And yet, an empowered God the Mother seems more consonant with one of Mormonism's most intellectually and spiritually compelling teachings, namely a belief in a God who wants to share power and spiritual authority, whose desire is our empowerment. This flows out of the LDS belief that while our heavenly parents are loving, perfected beings who gave birth, if you will, to our spirits, our essence, in Mormon terms, our intelligence, is uncreated and co-eternal with God, at least in pre-Madison Avenue Mormonism. The Mormon God is not the prime mover of traditional Christianity, but in the words of one writer, the most moved mover, empathy and love, if you will, deified. Because in Mormonism our essential selves are uncreated, our choices have real and profound theological consequence. We become, in a sense, co-creators with God, not only as parents, but as individual moral agents, striving with God for a more just and equitable world. We are not mere instruments in God's hands, but co-actors with God. As such, we are radically responsible for our choice either to perpetuate injustice by inaction or to embrace a moral activism that requires us to work for goodness, justice, mercy, and equality. Those who accuse Mormon women of being power-hungry if they advocate for women's ordination fail to recognize that in Mormonism, spiritual empowerment is the sum of God's hope for us as men and women. In this sense, wanting and accepting power is not a bad thing. There is no shame, nor are there accusations of improper ambition attached to a 12-year-old boy in the church who aspires to priesthood ordination. To be sure, power in institutions, including churches, can be wielded coercively and abusively. This is one reason women are leery of power, and Mormon scripture rightly warns about its ability to corrupt all of us. However, having power within an institution is preferable to institutional powerlessness, and having power can enable us to do tremendous good, particularly if we use it as we are told Jesus did, not to coerce, but to empower others. Nearly all Mormon feminists want women to have more voice and decision-making authority in the church. However, they are divided over the question of women's ordination. Part of this, I think, is a failure to see priesthood as a power that transcends gender. Since decision-making and pastoral authority is so closely tied to priesthood office in Mormonism, it seems clear to me that women must be ordained in order to have the institutional influence and spiritual authority they seek. Theological discourse and academic rhetoric aside, indulge me a few questions. With apologies to those who penned Fiddler on the Roof, I ask, would it really disrupt some vast eternal plan if women joined men in blessing their babies, baptizing their children, or giving blessings of healing and comfort to their neighbors? Would the heavens really be rent if women counseled troubled members of their congregations, blessed and passed the sacrament, kept church financial records, led the Sunday school, or lent their voices and experience to church decision-making councils? Isn't it about time we lay aside the tortured logic and rigid gender roles that keep us from seeing each other as we are? Brothers and sisters, colleagues and friends who are inching together towards sainthood.